Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I'll let you know before we get started. We just started recording the webinar, so we'll make the recording and also the slides available after the event. And I also want to let you know you can get one CM credit for joining the event today. So thanks for being here. My name is Jenny Koch, and I'm a principal planner with RHI, or Roadside in Harwell, and we're based in Alexandria, Virginia, just outside of DC. And today I'm representing the APA Sustainable Communities Division, and we're hosting today's webinar, which is our second in a series of 4 celebrating last year's Awards for Excellence in Sustainability winners. So today we have 2 of our winners represented, including OurCounty, the Los Angeles Countywide Sustainability Plan, and then Kim Lundgren Associates, who was our winner in the Leadership and Sustainability category last year. So you'll hear more from our speakers in just a bit, but I want to note if you're having any technical issues with the team's webinar today, just submit a note through the Q&A function, and I'll help you out once I get through the intro portion here. Before we get too far, I want to just pause briefly and thank all of our great sponsors for the division. Our sponsors this year include Burton Planning Services, Clarion Associates, CREA Affiliates, Aaron L. DDPA, Devon's Enterprise Commission, Dewberry, Evan Bach Consulting LLC, Environmental Partners, Farr Associates, Half Associates, Lockwood, Andrews, and Newman Incorporated, Planning Communities, Smith Group, Tesca Associates, University of Florida, University of Utah, UrbanWorks, VHB, Bisrain Consulting Group Incorporated. I did not have that memorized. That's a lot of people. So thank you so much for sponsoring the division, and thanks, of course, to the division members as well for your contributions to our work. If you're interested in volunteering with the Sustainable Communities Division, or just want to share an idea for a webinar or some other type of activity, you can reach out to us at any time. One example right now is that we have the National Planning Conference coming up in San Diego, I believe in April. Thank you for confirming, Kim. So if you're interested, for example, in helping to plan for events with the National Planning Conference, we'd love to hear from you. We also have some other opportunities available as well. So feel free to reach out. My contact info will also be up at the end of the presentation with more info. So as you know, as I've said, today we're talking about the Awards for Excellence in Sustainability. Before we hear from our winners from last year, I want to note a few things about this year's award program. If you're not familiar with the Awards for Excellence in Sustainability, they're focused on honoring projects, plans, policies, individuals, and organizations whose work is dedicated to supporting sustainable communities. So this year is our 9th awards program, which is really exciting. The deadline's still open until the end of next week, March 4th, so still plenty of time to submit a nomination. You can find out more, see if you're interested by looking at our information packet, which is on the website, APA-SCD.com/awards. Again, that URL will be shared later in the presentation as well. As with recent years, we're using a web form. It's fairly streamlined. We have made some changes to criteria and categories. So even if you've looked at that before, take a look again and see what changes we've made. But we really hope you'll consider submitting. We know, folks that are part of APA and tuning in here do a lot of great work. So we'd love to hear from you. Or you can share with others. That'd be great as well. If you know of a great project, please pass this along to them as an opportunity. I'll also be available to answer questions about the awards at the end of the webinar today. But to get to our main event, the reason we're meeting today, I'll briefly introduce our speakers representing 2 projects. So this is actually in reverse order of when you'll hear from them, but speaking today for OurCounty, the Los Angeles Countywide Sustainability Plan, we have Kristen Torres-Pauling and Chris Ree. Kristen is a sustainability program director for Los Angeles County. She's got over a decade of experience in the sustainability field, and Kristen oversees implementation of OurCounty. So we'll be hearing more about how that implementation is working today. Chris Ree is an urban planner at Borough Happold. He led the consultant team for OurCounty. Chris generally works with local governments, universities, and nonprofit organizations sort of across the country to develop sustainable infrastructure, land use, and climate policy frameworks. The first speaker who from today is Kim Lundgren, who's representing Kim Lundgren Associates, the winner in the Leadership and Sustainability category last year. As you might guess, Kim Lundgren, again, founder of Kim Lundgren Associates and CEO. Kim has spent the last 15 years designing, securing funding for, and implementing sustainability programs focused on energy, climate change mitigation, and climate change adaptation. She's got a really strong track record facilitating dialogues between local governments, institutions, businesses, and residents, all toward achieving these sustainability goals. And so you'll hear from all these speakers in a bit, but one quick note, we know you might have some questions as you're hearing from them. So if you have questions, please use the team's Q&A function to submit them throughout the webinar. And then at the end of the slides, we will have some time, hopefully, to get to some of the questions. That all being said, I will stop sharing my screen, and Kim, invite you to share yours and kick things off.
Okay, thank you so much, and good afternoon or morning, or depending where you are. My name is Kim Lundgren. I'm the CEO of KLA, as Jen just said. I will note that clearly I need to update my bio because I wish it's only been 15 years, but now I'm kind of over 20 years doing this work. So time sure flies when you're having fun, right? Let me get started. So KLA did win the Leadership and Sustainability Award for an organization last year, and certainly we just felt so proud. We have been working hard. I personally have been doing this work for over 20 years, working very specifically with local governments on climate change and sustainability plans and programs. Back in the early days, I was one of the first municipal sustainability directors, and I actually wrote the first climate action plan here in Massachusetts back in 2001, which is really hard to believe. And you know, back then, when we were kind of getting started with all this work, the early 2000s, we weren't really experiencing the impacts of climate change. And so the need to think about adaptation or being resilient to the impacts was not as much of a discussion. In fact, if you talked about anything other than mitigation in the early 2000s, then you were considered like giving up on the good fight. We really needed to make sure we're reducing our emissions. That's what we had to prioritize. And back then, and some of you may have seen this, this was the only impact image we had, was the polar bears that you know, got stuck on a broken piece of ice, and then unfortunately they go out to sea and they die. And so it's very sad to see something like that. And for me, I love polar bears, so it still breaks my heart to think about it. But the reality is that polar bears are not something that most people see every day. And so this really did not connect us as community members to climate change and what we maybe needed to do with it. Unfortunately, as you all on this call probably know, that now we are well past that. We are absolutely experiencing the impacts of climate change on a regular basis. They're happening every day, everywhere. We could have 500 slideshow representing that, and actually we do. I am a certified climate reality leader with Al Gore. This is one of the slides from that, which I am allowed to use. But ultimately, you know, we can see that 19 of the 20 hottest years on record have occurred since the year 2002. 2021 actually is about in 6th place, right between 2015 and 2018. These slides haven't been updated yet, but I mean, there literally is a 500 slide deck that is just showing impacts all over the world. So I started KLA about 7 years ago, very specifically recognizing that we needed to really think outside the box with this work, and we had to be more aggressive with the action we were taking. So the early days of, you know, just setting some goals, a lot of us set goals for 2010 that nobody met. We really weren't equipped to do it back then. But the idea is, hey, you know what, we've done some great work. There's some good discussion around it, but now we're in the 2020s and things really need to be escalating a bit more. Of course, I started this firm a little bit before that. But ultimately, if we want to transform our communities and really get to that sustainable future and avoid catastrophic climate change, we have to start taking more aggressive action. And so these core values, I think, are really important. It's really central to what KLA is all about, how we work with our clients, how we interact as a team, and how we're driven to move the needle on this issue. What I'm going to talk about today, very quickly, is just some of the key tactics that we use to help our clients achieve their climate goals. A lot of our work is done through climate action planning, but we do also help folks on the implementation side too. So some of these tactics can be, I mean, they all can be applied, of course, to a planning process, but they can also be applied beyond that as well. And I encourage folks to think about that. So we're going to dive right into these so that I leave plenty of time to hear about our county, which I know is a great project. So leveraging marketing tools. This is an area that KLA has really prioritized, and predominantly because, well, marketing and branding work. It's really important when we're talking about climate change and even broader sustainability, like we remember that we really do have to get to individual and collective behavior change. And it's not always easy to talk about that, but that is kind of what we need to do. And local governments are in a very good position to do that. That's why we work exclusively with them. But ultimately, in order to foster behavior change, you know, a message has to come from a trusted source. Still, to this day, over 75% of the US population feels that they can trust their local government leaders as opposed to state and federal. Local governments are able to have ongoing and consistent communication with individuals in a community, and local governments can create enabling environments. So if I'm trying to get folks out of their cars, we can't force folks to do that, but we can certainly develop safe bike lanes for them. We can have bike racks. We can just make it a safe and easy process for them to move into. And I think thinking about branding in general, I like to really emphasize with folks that your brand is not your logo. Your logo needs to represent your brand. And your brand really needs to be, what is that feeling that folks should experience when they engage with your initiative? And ultimately thinking about the messaging. How are you talking about this? And I encourage you, when you're thinking about this or moving forward, that you think about a broad audience. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But understanding that branding is an important tactic. Communication materials flow out of that. So once you have your brand messaging, you have your identity, your logo, other colors, fonts, things of that nature. Then you want to start getting your communication materials out there. We are huge fans of fact sheets and climate summaries. Almost everything we do is a one-pager. We call it a one-pager, but you get front and back. So technically, you get 2 pages. There's a lot of information that is needed to be fit into this tiny amount of space. However, it's really important to remember that these materials, they're not for you as the local government rep doing this work. They're not for your choir that already is taking action, and they would literally show up anywhere you ask them to, and they'll read anything you want them to. This is for that 70% of your community that maybe doesn't even know that they need to care about climate change, but they would be interested if you caught them in the right way. And so we want folks to be thinking about that. Make sure you're putting together pieces that are graphically pleasing, that are simple. We utilize a 6th grade language framing so that everyone can understand it. And actually that is the average. The average American can only read up to an 8th grade level. So in order to engage everybody, we really have to think about what inspires them, how we can reach them. It's not just about different languages, which is also important, but also think about ADA accessibility, folks that have visual or hearing loss. And then just thinking about what is something fun and interesting. We use a lot of story maps just to keep folks engaged and learn about their community in different ways. And then here's just a bunch of them. Infographics are huge. We love social media graphics. This one in the top corner, Don't Be Haunted. We're working with Salem, Massachusetts, right? Doing something around Halloween. We've got online quizzes. Again, your audience is all of these other people that aren't necessarily paying attention. So you need something that's going to quickly grab their attention. Okay, I could talk about communications all day long, but I won't, because now we're going to dive into equitable engagement. So this is another tactic that we use, and I do really encourage folks to consider stakeholder mapping processes. Again, for our sustainable and resilient future, we have to bring everybody along for the ride. Some people might have to be uplifted in order to be able to participate in the conversations around a plan, or even understanding projects that you're doing related to sustainability and climate change. It's important to identify who those target audiences are, and then who are the organizations already working with them. Most of the time, our planning processes, anywhere from 8 to 24 months, that's really not enough time to build the trust that's needed with individuals. And so leveraging existing community-based organizations to reach key audiences is a great way to engage them. And thinking about your stakeholder mapping, both from the standpoint of who in the community do we just want to be engaged in this process, as well as who is that core team, that advisory group or steering committee that's actually going to be driving the process moving forward. We're always wanting to get to the point of building community ownership. But again, as I noted, most of our planning processes don't allow us enough time to build the trust that is needed. But what I encourage you to do, and what we try to help our clients do, is move them down this line from, inform as far over to and collaborate and defer to as we can in a planning process. Ultimately, that is laying a foundation of groundwork from which you can work upon for the future. But that means you can't let your community engagement efforts stop when your plan is done, right? So we want to help you kind of keep that dialogue going. And one way we do that is helping build local capacity within the community-based organizations, as well as with individuals. And that's where our equity partners and climate ambassador programs come into play. Most of our climate action planning projects, our engagement goals are very specifically around growing climate literacy. As I said earlier, we can't invite people to the table to talk about something they might not have information on, right? We have to educate them first, and we have to attract their attention so that we can get to that point. We want to build local capacity to take action and to understand why this is an important topic, and then really engaging that diverse audience in the plan development. With our equity partners, we tend to look for organizations. Some of them might be environmental groups, but a lot of times they're not. They're just organizations representing, in some of the pictures here, the reentry population, or people experiencing homelessness, or maybe they are part of a Boys and Girls Club, seniors, any group that's representing an audience that might not typically be part of your planning conversation. So reaching out with those folks, you would have identified the organizations to some extent with your stakeholder mapping. Then once you have equity partners that are willing to be a conduit to individuals, we provide them training, both on what the planning process is about, what the community is trying to accomplish, but then we very much dive into a climate 101. We talk about communicating climate change. And most importantly, we like to focus in on how this work to address climate change actually links to the work that they are doing. Our community-based organizations are often understaffed, under budget. They need support, and they can't be getting pulled in a direction that seems counter to their mission. It's actually quite easy to find linkages with a lot of community-based organizations. And one great example I have from a community, we were working with equity partners, and I had reached out to this organization, and the executive director called me back and said, I really appreciate you reaching out, but we're focused in on helping seniors stay in their home, even when they're living by themselves. It has nothing to do with climate change. And I said, well, are you aware that those folks that we lose most often in an extreme event are seniors living by themselves, that they are actually quite vulnerable? And this executive director had no idea about that statistic. And so all of a sudden, it's just amazing to see a light bulb go off, like, oh my God, this is an issue for my community. How can I help them be resilient? And so we really help our equity partners play whatever role they're comfortable playing. And of course, we always pay them. There's always a stipend involved for the equity partners. Some of them are going to be strategic advisors, help us shape our engagement effort. And that includes the hybrid engagement opportunities that became popular during COVID. I think that's a good thing. And I think moving forward, we're going to continue to have hybrid, not solely remote, not solely in person, but actually both. Because what we did find was we were able to reach a lot of different people through online engagement than we were in person, right? If I'm a single mom and I'm home trying to feed the kids at night, I can't just leave and go to, City Hall for a meeting, but I could maybe hop on a Zoom for 30 minutes, right? So giving folks that flexibility is absolutely the way we're going to ensure equity moving forward. Also, our equity partners play a role in facilitating engagement, hosting meetings, and sometimes they're just messengers like, hey, you've got a great following on social. Can you pump out these messages for us a couple times a month? Whatever they choose, they get paid for. Our climate ambassadors are something I really love working with these folks, and we always get a range, whether it's students, even high school students through college students, we get seniors. We have some of our clients, folks that retired from the city or the county are now climate ambassadors. So really exciting to work with a group of folks that ideally are part of our target audiences. They help us promote the engagement and build that climate literacy because we train them and then they're training their peers and their friends and family in a way that resonates with them. And of course, same training that we give for the equity partners and always pay them a living wage. What's also really important with equitable engagement, you can't just wait till the end of the planning process to say, how did we do? What if you missed a whole group? You know, you need to make sure that you're incorporating touch points where you're checking in and seeing and evaluating. How did we do to this point? Have we reached everyone we need to? We just finished a survey in Clark County, Nevada. We had like 4,600 folks respond, and we had some great numbers for a lot of our target populations, but we noticed that our Latinx community was a little bit lower than it needed to be. And so now we know for this next round, we're going to be hyper focused and working with some of our community-based organizations that represent our Spanish-speaking members. This is just a success story. I won't take up time today, but you know, we did this, we applied this to Indianapolis, and the result was the most diverse effort that they had ever done. We had fantastic engagement from the African American, Latino, Burmese, reentry, homeless population, the youth, the seniors, and we reached over 250,000 individuals. This was something that I know the city as well as KLA is very proud of. Okay, making it real. This is where that we have to have that community-driven process, but it's got to be guided by data, right? We are at a point now where we know what it takes to reduce emissions. We really only have 8 years to take aggressive action to the levels that we can actually achieve the 2050 goals. So we have to see that improvement by 2030. And so we really have to leverage all the opportunities we have in a planning process to assess as much as possible. So if you're doing a greenhouse gas emissions inventory, a climate vulnerability assessment, you can also be diving into information related in the assessor's database, for example. You can see some of the metrics on the bottom right here, like understanding that, okay, buildings are a big chunk of our emissions. That's the case in most of our communities. Okay, well, how many of our residential buildings are owner occupied versus renter occupied? We're going to need different tactics to address that if we know that information. How many of our buildings are older than 40 years old or even more than that? How many haven't upgraded their heating systems? All of this is understanding that the data can guide us to a conversation with the community. The way we do GHG scenario planning is about kind of making it real. So once you have your inventory done, then you do a forecast of business as usual. That's what this graph is on the left, the business as usual. And the red dotted line is the target of where we're trying to get to. This is saying if we do nothing else, other than, you know, a renewable portfolio standard in the community, for example, or we know that the electric vehicle market is already moving on its own. Some of those are taken into account here. We still have a long way to go to reduce our emissions. So then we start looking at what are those strategies? How are we going to reduce emissions? What does it look like? In the past, that used to translate into, you know, okay, well, residential electricity, if we implement these reduction strategies, it'll be 36,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent or whatever, right? That's great. We were all excited to have a number back then, but the reality is, what does that mean to the public? What does that look like? And so we're now working to create these indicators so it's very specific. So you've got benchmark years. So it's not just that. It's like, okay, 10% of the homes have to be electrified by 2023. Okay, that's next year. How are we going to do that? This is obviously an older example from a year or two ago, but it gives you an idea that these are what the numbers are, and they are scary, but this is what it takes. And so it's really important to work with your community to understand how to do it there. And I'm watching my time here. Aiming for immediate action, the action implementation blueprints. So once we have all those strategies from the pathways analysis and from the community engagement, we like to run them through this screening. So here's one example, like a strategy: eliminate fossil fuels as an allowed energy source for any new construction and major renovations. I know that's a really big one and it's super aggressive. This community was comfortable with it. And then the question becomes, what are the mechanisms we have as local governments to do that? And this community was focusing on their regulatory options, voluntary incentives, and education. And so we started building out for the different sectors what actions could look like. And then we run them through barriers, opportunities, equity considerations, so that we're really understanding what those opportunities look like. And this is where you're going to get to an action that's far more implementable. So for example, you might have, this is new construction, but maybe you'd have a strategy specific to existing buildings. How do we get at existing buildings? Well, incentives and education are going to get us a lot further than regulation on existing buildings. We know that will be not politically welcomed in a lot of places. So needing to work with folks to understand what's that level of detail. And then maybe your action literally is, here in the Northeast, for example, we still have a lot of oil heat. So maybe we're working with the community. The action is literally to create a targeted outreach campaign to everyone in the community that has a home over 50 years old that's running on oil heat that hasn't done an upgrade. They might be prime for this, to go to a heat pump, for example. And so that way, when we get to this point, these blueprints are really detailing out specifically what we want to do. In this case here, they're looking at redesigning electricity rates and whatnot. We want to model time of use. We want to, get things moving, pilot smart meters, things like that, a very specific action, rather than getting to the point where you finished your plan and then the first step to implement the actions is to assess something else or to plan for something else. Lastly, the track and report progress. This is everything. Hold yourself accountable. You've got to put it out there. You've got to track your metrics. Just because it's in the plan, there's a goal. Oh, we implemented this action. Well, that's great, but did your action actually help you meet your goals? That's where your metrics come in, really breaking it up to that level so you can understand what it looks like to meet that, and then setting interim targets so that you're heading on the right path. We have our dashboard to help folks do that and to do it in a friendly way. We focus a lot more on data visualizations and images and graphics, because again, our audience is that 70% and not the folks that already know this stuff in detail. I just want to close by sharing some free KLA resources. We spent all of last year focusing in on our climate action planning process and the key components of it. These are all free. You can get them at our website, kimlundgrenassociates.com/climate-action-planning. I encourage folks to do that. There is my contact information, and I really appreciate everyone's time. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Kim. I know that was a lot to fit into a short amount of time, but it was great to get an overview of some of the things you've learned, about doing this work and, and whatnot in the past. So thanks for sharing that resource. That's great. Let's see, Kristen, if you want to go ahead and share your screen, that'd be perfect. But if anyone has questions for Kim, go ahead and put them in the Q&A function, and if we have time at the end, we'll get to some of those. So thank you again, Kim.
Great. Should I just go on ahead, Jennifer?
Sounds good. Yep. Now we'll hear from the OurCounty team. Okay,
great. Thanks everybody for joining. My name is Kristen Torres-Pauling. I'm a Sustainability Program Director at the County of Los Angeles Chief Sustainability Office. And Chris, you want to introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. My name is Chris Ree. I'm an Associate Principal at Bureau Happold and was the Consultant Team Project Manager.
Yes, so thanks to APA-SCD for having us and for the award last year. Chris and I are a small part of the team that we're helping to support the OurCounty Sustainability Plan process. So I'm going to just give some background on the Chief Sustainability Office. We're the office that initiated this process. We're a policy shop, basically, that works on sustainability. So we provide policy support to the County Board of Supervisors, the county departments, the unincorporated areas, but also to the larger 10 million person region of LA County. And that really fed into the approach and the scope that we took for the sustainability plan. Since this is a national audience, I know most folks think they know LA, but just want to reiterate a little bit about Los Angeles. It's of course been inhabited by more than 10,000 years by the Chumash, Tongva, and Tataviam tribes. I think maybe the latest census data is 1 in 34 American lives in Los Angeles. And our economy would put us in the G20 if we were our own country. So just, again, the complexity in Los Angeles makes it a really fun planning area. So the project that I'm going to describe today is our sustainability plan. The Board of Supervisors tasked us when they created our office just a little over 5 years ago with creating a sustainability plan that should be a vision for the county on sustainability. So in that, our plan is aspirational, it's long-term, 2025, and in one instance, 2050 is our planning horizon, that it's a regional document. So it's meant to, of course, give direction for the county, but really be an inspiration and vision for the other 88 cities and all the organizations and institutions within Los Angeles. So it's basically a strategic plan level. It doesn't have specific implementation guidance. It's not a climate action plan for sure. But it does try to really focus on areas where the county has direct control, recognizing that we have sort of influence on lots of spaces, but maybe not direct control. So our county operations, certainly one place that we thought about a lot, the unincorporated areas of Los Angeles, where of course we're the land use authority, 1 million people live in that. So we're a big city in that regard, which is a very dispersed big city. And then of course we have influence at places like our Regional Transportation Authority Board. Our Board of Supervisors all sit on that board as well. So, and same with our Air Quality Board, where we have a seat at that table as well. So that's just some context. So the plan itself, it doesn't look like a typical sustainability plan. It's not organized by all those topics that you see on the left of your screen, which of course are in there. But it's not like we have a water chapter. We took a very integrated, holistic approach to sustainability. And then we wove equity and resilience everywhere in the plan. So there's not a separate equity chapter, there's not a separate resilience chapter. And then of course we sort of uniquely worked very closely with our biggest jurisdiction, the city of Los Angeles, in that we were undertaking the creation of the sustainability plan at the same time as the city was making its first update of its sustainability plan, which is branded the LA Green New Deal. So we worked very closely with Mayor Garcetti's Chief Sustainability Office, and really helped us fortify some of the toughest things that we're taking on in the plan by saying that we will take them on together. Other context, Los Angeles is home, it's disproportionately home to disadvantaged communities when you're looking sort of within the state of California. If you're familiar with Los Angeles, this is a map of sort of hazard proximity and sensitivity to those hazards by census tract. You will see that the red is along freeway corridors in many cases, and then also home to sort of the heavier industries within Los Angeles. So we took this, and then of course that these are not census tracts that are, they're more census tracts of color, is sort of the context in which we do our work here in Los Angeles, that we have a lot of environmental injustices that are not just historic, that are here and impacting our communities today. And then we had a very intentional definition of equity, have a whole page actually dedicated to our definition of equity. So we set an overall definition of equity, and then our framework had 4 parts: procedural equity, distributional equity, structural equity, and transgenerational equity. You can read the slide there, and encourage you to flip to page 16 of the plan, which is the definitions of equity. But we knew that we had to acknowledge and address the inequities that already exist as a result of structural racism that has deliberately harmed communities of color. So what's in this plan? We have goals, strategies, and actions. Their goals are our broadest category. Strategies are slightly more specific about how we would achieve that end state. And actions are the level at which a county department could be charged with taking some specific policy or program on that would fulfill the strategy. So I have this slide and the following slide are the 12 goals listed out. I'm not going to read all of them to you, but just show you them to give an example of truly how cross-cutting and integrated the plan is. So just, you know, maybe for land use planners, this third one on the slide, equitable and sustainable land use and development without displacement. So while a lot of the strategies and actions in that goal are around land use planning, it also in the same breath talks about the need for tenant rights and tenant protections and small business protections to avoid displacement when we're thinking about how should we reconsider our land use in the region. So it's really not just a land use goal, a land use related goal. So that's one example of how cross-cutting they are. This next slide is the 6 through 12 of our goals. And you'll see our shortest and the one that I have the easiest time remembering is a fossil fuel free LA County. So that all of these are very ambitious goals. That is, you know, I've mostly had a climate focus in my career. So this is, you know, extremely ambitious and I think reflects the way that our engagement process was able to, you know, allow us to have a very high level of ambition because it was really backed up by the voices of community and brought forward by the voices of community members across the region. We do have performance monitoring built in, echoing Kim's previous point. We have targets, which is sort of quantitative measures of success related to the strategies, and then indicators that are sort of across the board performance monitoring. And one example of sort of that coordination between local governments within the county. So here's an example action on just transition. So this is action number 59 in our plan. And it's to collaborate with the city of LA and others to develop a just transition plan and task force that would examine the impact of a transition to a cleaner economy on disadvantaged workers, displaced workers, and coming up with recommendations to have a more inclusive employment practice within sectors of growth within the economy. So that's the action language. Each of our actions had a horizon, so short, medium, or long term. That sphere of influence, is it direct or indirect? Is it something the county can do on its own, or does it really need to play that partnership role? And here, this one's both. Identifying a key or the county department that is in charge. So every action is assigned to a county department, the chief executive office, which is references our office, the chief sustainability office, which was housed in CEO. And then partners. This is an example of where we went a little bit beyond the bounds. Usually the partners, we don't name specific partners, but this one was so important, and we had buy-in from the city of Los Angeles and from labor unions that they wanted to be named on this action. So really speaks to the level of dialogue that we had to really say, we can take this action on and we can take it on together. And we had to have those conversations, a lot of conversations prior to being able to put these words down on paper. So I will hand it over to Chris to talk about stakeholder engagement and how our plan, our consultant team was structured.
Thanks, Kristen. And I'm going to do a whistle-stop tour of our stakeholder engagement strategy. We actually had presented an entire presentation on this for APA California, and perhaps we can include that link when we send the slides around after this presentation. But let's get into it. Okay, so starting off with some guiding principles for equitable engagement. It's nice that you heard from Kim about the stakeholder mapping process, and then Kristen talked about the complexity of Los Angeles. And LA, in addition to being one of the most ethnically and language diverse metros in the US, also has the highest rate of poverty in California, and there are some extreme disparities. And so from the very outset, our county intended to center environmental justice communities and low-income communities and communities of color. And this was exemplified by, you see here, ask, don't tell, or another way to think of this in planning is it's not the design and defend approach to stakeholder engagement. The agenda for the plan was not set at the outset, other than wanting to include the co-equal values of environment, equity, and economy. And we spent a lot of time listening. With an intersectional approach, there's no wrong door to having a conversation about sustainability. And so certainly one of the most pressing social issues in LA is housing and houselessness. We were having conversations about that and how it related to sustainability. Talking about safety and transportation. And if you're a person of color riding transit, that means having a conversation about law enforcement on transit. So it was much more expansive, I would say, than my experience in working on other plans, which ultimately led to some of the cross-cutting goals that you saw a bit earlier. Let's move on to the next slide. So here's just a look at the project team. I'm with Bureau Happold, which was the prime firm. We teamed up with, in a bit of an unusual arrangement, with the Liberty Hill Foundation and the University of California, Los Angeles, to lead the stakeholder engagement process. And we designed it to be looking across sectors, and also critically to be working with 5 anchor community-based organizations. So there are 5 county supervisors in LA, and we deliberately decided to work with one CBO in each district: CBE, Day One, East Yard, Pacoima Beautiful, and Scope. All of them were not just involved in carrying out the stakeholder engagement events themselves, but really, truly in shaping the plan, in defining the agenda from the outset, in reviewing multiple drafts as they were in process, and really driving this process. And we also had a number of subject matter experts, as you can see at the bottom of the slide. Let's keep moving. And just this is a quick glimpse at how these roles divided up. In truth, I would say that this was, this is more of a Venn diagram. We were certainly all collaborating. There were many, many folks involved, but we're intentional about the NGO sector, about the public sector, which was led by the county, and also private sector stakeholders, and thinking about how all of these pieces fit together. Next slide. And here we have, some of the high-level stats here. Certainly, there was a lot of engagement. That's one point. But the core of it were these half-day workshops that we had, that you see some images of on your right. And there were 11 of them all together. That we had about 600 people attend from 350 organizations, and those who needed participation stipends were also accommodated for this as well. The county also convened cities a couple of times, city governments a couple of times during this process, to ask what would it mean to have a county-wide sustainability plan? How could the county support regional sustainability efforts? This was not a one and done. There were certainly a lot of effort made to truly incorporate all of the recommendations coming out of those half-day workshops and present them through draft review sessions before the plan was finalized in August 2019. Let's go to the next slide. And I just want to sort of show some images from what we called our environmental fairs and expos in partnership with our CBOs, anchor CBOs. We had one in each supervisorial district. These were open to the public. They were usually on a Saturday, and they were designed to be really fun ways to engage with the plan. So certainly, the classic dot voting exercise you can see in the top middle, as we had conversations around some of the recommendations in the plan. And we also worked with other county departments and nonprofit organizations to bring resource tables to bear. There was a EV ride and drive, so you could sort of drive a little e-golf around. There were children's activities, but I think the important point here is that every single one of them had childcare services and real-time translation services, really making it as easy as possible for members of the public to participate and lower those barriers to participation. And I'm also not going to read off all of the NGOs listed here, but these beyond our anchor CBOs, we also had all of these other additional stakeholders across the county who are providing input through the workshops, through the draft review sessions, through the expos, and this just gives a quick sense for who those are.
Great. Thanks, Chris. So I am now going to spend our last 3 minutes talking about a touch of implementation and how that's going. So when the board adopted the plan, they gave us some specific direction about how, because our plan has 159 actions. The board wanted to know, what are you actually going to do in the next year? So they took a board action to add sustainability as a board directed priority. So now there are 7. They just sort of are the top things the board wants to focus on. Sustainability is now one of them. Our department heads at the county, their performance evaluation includes a question about how is your department working on implementing the sustainability plan. So that gets the departments to the table to make sure that their department heads can respond when the CEO asks and the board asks that question. They tasked our office with annually setting forth a set of specific priorities for the upcoming fiscal year, and that should sort of jive with the budget process. And also asked us to do a sort of a landscape analysis of sort of private and state funding sources that could also support implementation, and that we were also to annually report on progress, and that we should update the county's legislative agenda to coordinate with the plan. So we have done all those things. And most of I didn't delve into this too much, but nearly all the actions in the sustainability plan are basically directly implemented by the county department. So not our team. We're sort of part of the sort of hierarchy, the top level. So we coordinate the action, but we aren't ourselves taking on many of the actions. So it really relies on our departments. And we coordinate that work through a sustainability council, and we have regular discussions with department heads. And we sort of are a source for getting information about how implementation is going. And just an example of it's a 21/22 priority list fiscal year. So we have taken action, we've gone beyond this first action. The board has eliminated oil and gas operations from all unincorporated areas. So we've gone beyond the step-back approach. We're slowly trudging along on an approach towards building decarbonization. And I think you can expect some exciting news from the county there in a little bit. We conducted a climate vulnerability assessment that looked at social and physical vulnerabilities to climate change down to the census tract level. And we're working on multi-benefit water management solutions. Oh, I don't think I have my normal closing slide. But those are some examples of the kind of actions that the county has taken for, we said 159 things. What are we actually doing? Here are some examples of the actual meat of how implementation is working. And that's the close of our slides. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, thanks. And Chris, again, I know you're fitting a lot of material into a process into a 15-minute presentation. It's very difficult, but thank you for that overview. I think folks can certainly look up the plan to learn more and track the implementation as you go. It sounds like there might be some exciting things coming up there. So thanks again for that presentation. We do have a couple of questions in the Q&A. If anyone else has anything they want to add, please feel free to do so. Let's see here. I put in, let's see, Kim, I had a few questions for you based on some of the things you had mentioned, and I could go through them sort of one by one here. I don't know if you saw them in the box or not. But when you were talking about specific sort of different brands that you use, and sort of it resonated with me in thinking about how important a brand, a name can really be to a process. You look at OurCounty, for example. I think that's a great sort of brand for this kind of process. Are there any particular brands that you have used in your work, Kim, that you thought were particularly impactful?
Yeah, a great question. I mean, it really has to be what resonates with the community. But to be honest, I am often encouraging my clients to not put climate change or sustainability or resilience into the brand if that's just not how their broader community is going to accept it, right? Unfortunately, some folks feel that sustainability or climate change have been politicized in these terms. So I love what LA County did, OurCounty. That's bringing everybody in. I'm curious about that. I live here. What is this about, right? We actually have, I had mentioned Clark County, Nevada earlier. They're one of our big clients right now. And when we were doing the branding for them, we kept saying, well, how are they going to know it's Clark County, Nevada, not Clark County, Ohio, or Clark County, North Carolina? And we ended up going with All In Clark County. And so you've got the All In, kind of gaming reference saying this is the Vegas Strip. But also it very much also means we're going all in on climate change, with Southern Nevada really hadn't in the past. And then, it's all in, meaning we're all in this together, really an inclusive process. So I love when, kind of a brand name can really have so many different connotations that it just can be something fun. And so we're pumping out all this on All In, and people are like, hey, what is that about? What's that? Similarly, like in Indianapolis, we did Thrive Indianapolis, and that was just, hey, what's that? Who's going to say I don't want my city to thrive? So really just trying to be creative. And honestly, the hardest thing is for my clients to remember they're not the audience. So I would remind folks, you are not the audience. It's everybody else that's not taking action yet.
I think that's a good reminder. My second question is sort of related to that, actually, and it's logistical, I guess. But you mentioned, having materials at a 6th grade reading level, which, I think we all run into the issue where we have a lot of jargon and whatnot in our plans. And so I was wondering, is there a tool that you all tend to use to test that sort of reading level?
Honestly, sometimes I just go to like the EPA or the DOE kids pages. That's always a great place to start. I have a neighbor across the street from me that's a grade teacher. I'm always telling folks, this doesn't have to be spending tens of thousands of dollars to hire someone to do this for you. You have a kid, ask your kid, do you understand what this means? There's lots of ways that we can do things that, don't have to cost money, that are just leveraging the resources that we have locally. But I honestly, the kids pages, and I do want to stress, it doesn't mean we don't need to educate on what these words are. So there are some words that I'll maybe avoid altogether and just describe a different way, but there are some that need to be discussed. And I do think it's important that folks understand, if you're taking on a climate action planning process, how are we defining our sustainable future? How are we defining what resilience looks like, and really getting everybody together on that definition and not ignoring it. I just don't think you want it in the brand name.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Thanks, Kim. Let's see. One question we had for Kristen and Chris. We have a few questions here. Kim had noted that one of the challenges, we've seen is everyone says they want equitable engagement. People want really thorough engagement, but often local governments don't necessarily have the appropriate budget to do so, or the budget that might match to what they want to do. So we were curious about if you're able to share what % of the total project budget LA County dedicated to equitable engagement, even sort of rounding perhaps or whatnot. Be curious to know.
Sure. Yeah, no, I like that question, and I often I should just put it on a slide permanently, because I typically actually say it. I think it helps. I mean, I will back up and say, before I just give the number, political will is sort of a very important piece here, right? And we happened to be in a good place with political will. I mean, not happen. That's how our office came to be. And a couple years after a very substantial shift in term limits. And so there's these bigger governance questions, which is sort of my jam. So I won't go into too much. The specific, planner question here. So we started at around 25%. We went and got an additional grant to expand that. So it was closer to 30% was for stakeholder engagement. And that was, we were able to do, like Chris articulated, the child care services, which you can't do with our just general fund money. that kind of thing. So we got 3, I'm trying to remember how many grant reports I had to write. 2 or 3 outside grants that helped us expand from just the original 20-some%.
I just wanted to add that the other component that local governments can take into account is thinking about the time horizon for planning, for the planning process. So Kim mentioned this, right? You can't move faster than the speed of trust, or if you do, you're setting yourself up for failure. Oftentimes, I certainly as a consultant, I see the desire to have plans complete in a very short time frame, and I would encourage as much as possible and as much foresight as you have to really consider what is necessary in order to build those trusted relationships.
I think that's a good note. Both of those things, the time frame and sort of budget to dedicate to that, both very important. Let's see, I probably only have time for one more question here. Curious to know, with LA County, were there any tools or sort of specific processes that you all use to prioritize actions? Did you bring community input into that process somehow, or what was the process you used?
Yeah, Chris, you want to start that
one? There was definitely community input along the way. I mean, to be quite honest, it was a lot of working sessions around a table of going through our huge spreadsheets of potential recommendations and in bucketing and in creating thematic areas and having pretty extensive discussion, and then realizing, when we need to go out and speak with others. So it was really about having a great and diverse in every sort of sense of the word core team that was able to sort of make filter those a bit and then go out and have conversations when needed.
Yeah, that makes sense. Maybe I do have time for one more quick question. In this very community-centric process that you guys used for OurCounty, and I know Kim sort of alluded to in other projects she's worked on, were there any, having not come into it with set goals you were trying to achieve or whatnot in the plan, they were sort of developed with the community. Was there anything that was really surprising to you that came out of this OurCounty process where you're like, oh, I wouldn't have expected that to be one of the major priorities that we heard about? And there might be that the answer is no, but is there anything that was surprising to you?
I mean, I think I sort of referenced the degree to which housing issue, and Chris talked, I mean, housing is just top of mind for anybody who lives in LA. It maybe isn't the top agenda item in a typical sustainability plan. So I think that was, it's a surprise and not a surprise, right? But it was like to the degree to which we heard like, oh, my neighbor got solar on the roof and they said their rent went up. So how, like, I'm concerned about that. Or there's EV chargers installed, and like that to me is a sign of gentrification. Like hearing, concerns like that, which are legitimate concerns, and thinking about, well, what kind of community solutions can we lift up that overcome those and reframe those?
Yeah. Great. Well, yeah, that's, like you said, surprising but not surprising, but interesting to hear about. So that being said, we're after 1 o'clock. So Kim, Chris, Kristen, thank you so much for your time, and thanks for those who joined us. Like I said, we'll be putting the recording on the website so y'all can view it there as well if you'd like. So have a good rest of your day. We'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Okay, bye-bye.